Thank you, Father Jim. It's my happy task to introduce our speaker. He was named by U.S. News & World Report as one of America's best leaders in 2009. Eboo Patel is the founder and president of the Interfaith Youth Corps, a Chicago-based organization building the interfaith movement on college campuses. Spurred by the belief that religion is a force for good, Eboo was founded the Interfaith Youth Corps in 1998 at the age of 22. He looks 22 now. You're lucky. And the goal of the Interfaith Youth Corps is to harness the positive energy of young people of all faiths, including Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, to replace religious conflict with interfaith cooperation, and to inspire college students from diverse backgrounds to work side by side in service projects. Today, the Interfaith Youth Corps is a thriving organization active on close to 100 campuses across the United States, many of them Catholic, and in several foreign countries. He's the author of many books. He has a book he'll speak about today is his latest book, out of many faiths. He's also the author of Sacred Ground, Pluralism, Prejudice, and the Promise of America, and Acts of Faith, the story of American Muslim, the struggle for the soul of a generation, which won the Louisville Grawemeyer Award in Religion. Eboo is also a regular contributor to the Washington Post, USA Today, Huffington Post, NPR, and CNN. He served on President Obama's inaugural advisory council of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership, and holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. He was an Ashoka Fellow, part of a select group of social entrepreneurs whose ideas are changing the world, and was recently awarded the Guru Nanak Interfaith Prize, an award given to an individual to enhance awareness of the crucial role of religious dialogue in the pursuit of peace. Today, Eboo lives in Chicago with his wife, Shanaz Mansouri, and their two sons. And probably the most important thing you need to remember, as we were talking earlier, Eboo promised that he won't be boring tonight. So please join me in welcoming Eboo Patel.
I will attempt to not be boring tonight. Smart lettering. So I first want to say just how deeply grateful I am to Catholic Spaces. In so many ways, my formation as an interfaith leader happens around Catholics. My dad got admitted to Notre Dame University in 1975. That's why my family is in this country. Developed a fierce devotion to fighting Irish football, perhaps too much of a devotion because he barely scraped through with his degree in South Bend. But he would take us to Notre Dame football games in a couple games in the fall of every year. And our first stop before going to the stadium would be the Grotto. And I remember at one point, I was 10 or 11 years old, I had a little bit of Islamic knowledge in my head, always a dangerous thing, a little bit of knowledge. And I wanted to get to the stadium early. And I said to him, should we Muslims be praying at a shrine with an idol? Isn't this against our religion? Some lesson I'd been taught, probably the week before, actually. And my dad, who is not an especially ritualistic person, points inside the grotto with all these flickering candles, and he says, remember that the Quran describes God as light upon light. There is your light upon light. And this is kind of an early interfaith lesson for me, right? And my dad looks at me and says, look, there's always going to be differences and disagreements. I advise you to look for the resonances. I'm 10 or 11 years old, and these things, play a role in your formation. 7, 8 years later, when I am a hair-on-fire college activist looking to burn things down, somebody says to me, have you ever heard of Dorothy Day? And it turns out that the most radical person who I was, and of course this is an example, she'd been dead 15 years at that time, but the most radical example I ever encountered was this Catholic woman who didn't serve the poor, but gave up her privilege to live in solidarity with them for 50 years, and was not in the least bit impressed with herself for doing so. And I was so taken by the Catholic worker movement that I spent the summer after my second year in college traveling through Catholic worker houses from Atlanta to Boston. You can imagine my immigrant parents were like, we immigrated from India for this? Seriously? But I was so moved by the example of somebody who said, Jesus shows us the way, we should live like Jesus does. And that means what you do not immediately need, you go down and you give to others. And each home should have a Christ room. And I was blown away by this. And I was blown away by the humility in which that was offered and the length of time that she did that work. And the stories go on and on and on. Actually, a faculty member at this institution, Brother Wayne Teasdale, is the person most responsible for bringing me specifically into interfaith work. I shared some of these stories with the group of deans and seminary presidents who met earlier, but they're worth sharing again, I think. Brother Wayne was this mystic who had taken vows in both a Catholic monastic order and also a Hindu order, and had been recognized as such, recognized for doing both. And he would go give these talks at different houses of worship around Chicago, the Jain Temple in Bartlett, for example, and he would bring my friend Kevin Koval and me along. After he did this beautiful hour-long talk on Catholicism and Jainism, et cetera, he would call Kevin and I up and he'd say, tell them about the Interfaith Youth Movement. This is like 1997, and we were 22 at the time. And literally on stage, as I'm walking to the microphone, I whisper in his ear, I'm like, there's no Interfaith Youth Movement. He's like, well, make it up. And like, that's what we did. We had 5 steps between Brother Wayne telling us to make it up in the microphone to like say, this is what this could look like someday. And at some point, as you're telling that story, you think to yourself, well, maybe somebody ought to do something about this. Sounds pretty good. And then you look around, and there's Brother Wayne staring at you and saying, you are a very spiritual person. Which he would say about dogs in Hyde Park. He'd stop. I was like, that is a very spiritual dog. So he had such good taste in dogs, right? I mean, like, how am I not going to try to start something interfaith in the process? So the long and the short of it is that I owe a great deal to Notre Dame, to Catholic Theological Union, to Brother Wayne, to Dorothy Day. And I had this moment that I want to share with you. And this is all, in many ways, prologue to the main talk, but it's also my offering of gratitude for this space and for the people who brought me here. So I had the chance to be on the South Lawn with 10,000 of my favorite citizens when Pope Francis came in October of 2015. And the security is crazy, right? Like, they're like digging through bags and stuff. And there's a woman, 3 people in front of me, and the security person is digging through her bag, and she brings out this big plastic bag out of her backpack with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prayer beads. And the woman doesn't speak English, and the security guard can't figure out what this is, right? But I'm imagining her story, right? Like, she is a Mexican woman, maybe from Houston, maybe from Mexico City, maybe from Miami. She doesn't speak English. And all these people in her parish have given her their rosaries so they could be in the presence, in what we Ismaili Muslims would call the huzur of the Holy Father. And I know that pilgrimage because we Ismaili Muslims do that, right? Like for the Aga Khan came to the United States last year to celebrate his Diamond Jubilee, 60 years. And for the people who couldn't go personally, they handed their prayer beads, their tasbihs, to those who could go, so they could be in the huzur of Hazrat. So I'm like watching this woman. I say to the security guard, their prayer beads, like mine. Right? It's this really beautiful moment. I don't think she could understand what I was saying, but she looked at me and she was like, thank you, right? And those are jewels, like that little beautiful jewel of not only do I know what that is, but I can imagine the story where that comes from, and it is beautiful, and it is blessed. And I want to do my part in helping that story come to a positive conclusion. So I want to say thank you for the institutions you have built, for the examples you've given the world, and for what it's done for me and so many others. Now on to some other parts of my talk. So I want to take a bit of a turn. I want you to turn with me a little bit. I want to tell you the story of one of my mentors, Ruth Messenger. So Ruth is well known for a variety of things. She was Manhattan Borough president during the 1990s. She ran against Giuliani for mayor. She was the president of American Jewish World Service, a really inspiring service organization that draws on Jewish identity and faith to serve people around the world, mostly non-Jews. And she's been a friend and a mentor of IFYC and mine since the beginning. She took IFYC seriously, like, from the time 9 voices spoke in my head about the importance of this, from the time of Brother Wayne, actually 98, 99. And somebody at IFYC, when she came to give a talk to us, once said, well, why do you care about this work so much? Why do you spend so much time with us? And she's like, well, this interfaith work was formative in my life, and she tells the story. She grew up in an observant Jewish household in, I think it was Manhattan. She got to Radcliffe, Radcliffe, Harvard University. She's against the Vietnam War. This is the 1960s. She's feminist, urban, highly educated, Jewish, and she and her husband at the time want to escape the war. They don't want him to get drafted. And one of the ways to do that is, if you're a medical doctor, to get placed in a hospital in the United States that needs to be served, that is hard to serve. And so they sign up for this. And Ruth is telling the story. She's like, we kind of hope we wind up in Seattle. They wound up an hour from Norman, Oklahoma. Ruth goes and gets an MSW from the University of Oklahoma. And this is 1965. It's Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. And one of the programs is to kind of codify foster care work across the country. So it's not localized and kind of ad hoc, but there's a standardization. So Ruth's first professional job is to be the person who is attempting to set up the foster care network in the western part of the state of Oklahoma. And she's got a new baby at the time, and she's kind of wheeling this baby around in its pram in the neighborhood in which she lives. And she's looking at all these houses in this neighborhood, and some of them have these little signs that say Church of Jesus Christ who died for our sins, Church of the Holy Blood of our Savior, things like this. And Ruth thinks to herself, well, clearly a community gathers here, and therefore a leader must live here. So just kind of, out of the entrepreneurship of her mind, she knocks on the door, she introduces herself as Ruth Messenger, she says what she's meant to do, which is to set up this foster care network for which she needs foster homes, people who volunteer to be foster families, and can she maybe give a talk to the church? She's happy to come by on Sunday mornings. This is when she finds out that these churches operated like literally every hour of the day, right? There's like an 11 a.m. on Wednesday service, there's a 4 p.m. on Tuesday service, and so she comes, the pastor learns about Ruth a little bit and says, sure, come by. Come by, and after the sermon, make your pitch. So, I want to remind you, this is 1965, it's Western Oklahoma, this is Okie-from-Muskogee era, right? So let's just start to draw the distinctions between who Ruth is and who these people are. Ruth is urban. These people are rural. Ruth has a degree from Harvard, Radcliffe, and an MSW. These people are against women working outside the home. Ruth is against the Vietnam War. She is escaping the Vietnam War. These people are very for the Vietnam War. Ruth is a feminist. These people are not feminists. Ruth is Jewish. These people are not Jewish. In fact, Ruth shares that she hears, no small number of things during these sermons that are offensive. Jews kill Jesus kind of offensiveness. Ruth sits in the back, listens to the sermon, gets up at the end, pastor invites her up. There's 15, 18, 20 people on the porch or in the backyard. Ruth talks about the challenge of foster kids in this area, the need for foster homes, tells the stories of a couple kids, etc., etc. The pastor comes back up to the homemade lectern, opens up the Bible, reads chapter and verse about the importance of service, says this is God's work and this woman is helping us get here, and Ruth's recollection is like literally 2/3 of the people in the audience stand up and they sign up to be foster families. And this is like church after church after church, right? And as Ruth gets to know these families, a lot of them are women who are signing up whose husbands are truckers. So they're gone 4 or 5 nights a week or 3 weeks of the month, and they're like, we'll do this, right? So what happens is the police chief will call Ruth at midnight and say, we've got a truant. I'm going to give you an hour to find this truant in a foster home, or I'm going to take her to Miss Lucy's orphanage. And there's clearly some kind of collusion going on between the police and Miss Lucy's orphanage. So Ruth starts to go down her list of evangelical Southern Baptist women. And she doesn't have to go down that far until somebody says, sure, I'll take her. So Ruth goes to the police station, picks this kid up, takes her to, whoever's house, and hot chocolate is waiting, and a warm bath is waiting, and that's like Ruth's life for a couple years. So here's a serious question. Is Ruth a traitor? You know I was going to ask that, right? Is Ruth a traitor? In the middle of the Vietnam War, you are escaping and protesting the war. And you're going to work with people who are not only sending their sons, but voting for Nixon? You are a highly educated woman. These people don't think women should be working outside the home. You hear this all the time. And you're working with them? Really? Isn't Ruth a traitor?
A traitor to what?
A traitor to every socio-political cause that she claimed to believe. A traitor to feminism, a traitor to the peace movement, a traitor to urban cosmopolitan values. Can you imagine working with a them? Must I further elaborate on who a them is in this room? Can you This is amongst the interesting questions. Which disagreements are so great that they negate any chance of other relationship? Which stakes are so high that other disagreements seem small? I will not set up a foster care network with you because I disagree with you on same-sex marriage. Sorry. You're going to have to find somebody else to take you to a safe home. I ask this question because I have a posture, if not a view. And because these are some of the central questions of our democracy right now. I didn't live during the Vietnam era. Some great music came out of it. But there was a war going on. And who you voted for made a difference in whether it continued. It is not crazy to think that those who didn't only protest and resist might have been called complicit or collaborators. And the loudest voice in me says, those foster kids, yeah, it was worth it to them. I want to step back a little bit. And I want to ask a question about what does it mean to build a healthy, diverse democracy? By the way, my favorite new line, diversity is not just the differences you like. You know how I came up with that line? Because my kids go to upper middle class, mostly white North Side school with diversity as our strength and multiculturalism is beautiful stuff everywhere. And I'm a little bit of a curmudgeon in my early middle age. And at one point I said, when did they teach you diversity isn't just egg rolls and samosas? It's people who are in favor of wars that you can't stand. What does it mean to build a healthy, diverse democracy? Michael Walzer, in this great little book called What It Means to Be an American, he says, for centuries, political philosophers believed that you could not have diversity in a democracy. If you wanted diversity, it had to be an empire. Because how would one racial, ethnic, religious group ever allow a different racial, ethnic, religious group to elect its representative or exponent to a general office that ruled over all? It'll never happen. If you want democracy, it has to be homogenous. Ends that section and begins the next section with the words, until the United States of America. And it was interesting for me reading this book. I was 22, 23 at the time, probably 5 inches left of center. Didn't have much good to say about the American founding, right? And that was kind of a swivel head moment, right? So what Walzer is pointing out is that amidst the untold crimes and sins of the founders, and they are legion and they ought to be called out, there is an interesting, different way to understand that story, which is that they, amidst their crimes and sins, these things can go together, imagined a nation in which at least some people from some different lands praying to God in different ways could come together and build a country. Never been imagined in that way before, certainly never been tried. Right? Very interesting. Why hadn't it been tried? Well, Rousseau once said, how can you live with the person you believe is damned? That's one of the reasons. Because this notion that somebody who prays to God differently, or has a different definition of why we're on the planet, or a different understanding of what a good life or a moral person is, those things are incompatible with a society in which people get to participate in the shape of that society. Until the United States of America. Let's define, you can see the baggage of graduate school revealing itself. Let's define our terms. What's a democracy? A democracy is not just a place where people elect their representatives. A democracy is a place where private convictions can be made public. If you are pro-choice, you could stand up in that street corner, hand out flyers, get a megaphone, support candidates, run for office yourself, etc., etc. If you're pro-life, you can do the same thing on the same street corner. Your private convictions in a democracy can be made public. What is diversity? It's not just the differences you like. Not just the differences you like. So we have a society in which different identities that are incompatible, or at the very least in tension, can both be made public at the same time. What is religion? Tillich says religion is about ultimate concerns. Okay, so we're finding our way to why political philosophers didn't think you could have a religiously diverse democracy. How could people who defer on matters of ultimate concerns ever live in a society in which their participation controls the shape of that society? It's impossible. What is a healthy, religiously diverse democracy? I think that there's a core thing that makes it healthy. the ability to disagree on some fundamental things and still work together on other fundamental things. The ability to disagree on some fundamental things and still work together on other fundamental things. That's what Ruth Messenger did. You know what? My wild guess is, if you were to ask Ruth in the abstract, 6 months before she arrived in Oklahoma, could you ever see yourself sitting through this sermon, overhearing this guy at the diner talk about feminism and women working, and then find yourself following that person to his homemade lectern pulpit, inviting his makeshift congregation to participate in a foster care network, and then letting him follow you up and give a biblical set of chapters and verse about why that should. Could you imagine that in the abstract? My wild guess is she couldn't. And when she was there, she just did it. Hero or traitor? Hero or traitor? John Courtney Murray, the great Jesuit philosopher, has some insight into this. He says, we have to recognize that a diverse society is the kind of political community that is able to hold the divergent views of diverse groups. That's the definition of a diverse society. He points out what is very often forgotten in this kind of definition is the importance of the strength of the underlying community. It is not principally the divergent group views of the diverse groups. It is principally about the strength of the underlying community. He asked the question, what kind of differences are too much or too many for a unified society? And what kind of unity does a diverse society require? Again, these are questions that he's posing, right? These are questions that he's posing. And I play with these myself, so I shared a couple of these over the course of dinner. I'm probably 2 inches left of center, pretty close to basically Obama position and Obama posture pretty much across the board. And I would say 99% of my world is somewhere between, I'm the conservative in my world, right? Some colleagues on staff here, they would probably agree with that. I'm the Obama progressive and I'm the conservative in my circles. My circles go from 2 inches left of center to about 5 inches left of center, I would say. So my oldest son is part of the travel basketball league, where the founder of the league gleefully retweets Trump quotes. Do I pull him? Serious question. Do I pull him? I mean, separation of children, this crazy thing that he just did yesterday, mocking Dr. Blasey Ford. Are you kidding me? What kind of cretin does that? Right? The Muslim ban on and do I pull my son? I am on a number of campuses every year, and I increasingly encounter student groups who proudly say that they will not work with another student group. We are boycotting that group because of issue F. We will do nothing in the alphabet with that group. So here's the question that has formed in my mind over the course of seeing this over the past couple of years. Let's say you're a heart surgeon. Let's say you are scheduled for a life-saving heart surgery next Tuesday. Let's say it's a 2-person heart surgery. And as you're dressing, the person next to you takes off his Make America Great hat again. Make America Great hat, and puts it in the locker. Kind of look at this person, you're like, guess I'm not talking to you. 5 minutes later, you walk into the surgery room, and there he is, putting his gloves on. You leave. You're not working with that person. So, at what point does the disagreement kill the opportunity for a relationship? So being a part of a travel basketball league, I mean, there's a half dozen of those, right? They're inconvenient for me, but do I take a stand and I'm like, I don't want my kid part of this. You are normalizing misogyny. You are normalizing racism. By the way, I think all that's true. I don't want my kid a part of this. I won't perform a heart surgery with you because I don't like the person you voted for who is normalizing misogyny, normalizing racism, etc., etc. What kind of disagreements negate the possibility of relationship across the board? What kind of stakes make certain disagreements feel at least temporarily small? I actually think that religious stories, Father Marco's like, you're going to get to this at some point, right? The religion part, Catholic Theological Union and all, right? I actually think religious stories and symbols and examples have a lot to teach you. I think that there is in that treasure trove language and posture and ethics and symbols which I just find myself drawing from increasingly these days. Right? Part of what I'm about to say comes from a theory of social change, which for me is in part strategic and it is in part just my personality. Right? So it's not something I'm making an argument for or a pitch for, it's something that I'm just putting out there for consideration. But anybody catch Michelle Alexander's opening up-ed in the New York Times a couple weeks ago where she says, "We are not the resistance." So it's a striking op-ed, right? I mean, because the woman who writes the new Jim Crow, you would imagine to view herself as kind of central to the resistance. At least I did, right? But she writes this op-ed, which I would commend to all of you. She says, "We're not the resistance. We are part of the river of freedom, and the river is universal, and it involves the black kid who is picked up by the police and thrown in jail and never given another chance. And it involves the Guatemalan mother who's escaping the death gangs in Guatemala, and it is eternal. It has existed from the beginning of time, freedom movement after freedom movement after freedom movement. We are part of this part of the river. Be proud of its universal qualities. Be proud of the history of this. Know that we are building this next leg of the river. This other person is the resistance." That is a narrative that speaks to my particular heart. Again, I am not putting that out there as an argument. I'm putting that out there as a consideration. That is a framing for what I am involved with. I think to myself, yes, let's go the next step. Yes, let's go the next step. And what I'm about to say, in terms of the religious symbols and stories and ethics that I draw from, it fits into that narrative of I want to see myself part of people from the beginning of time who have fought for greater dignity and freedom and pluralism and cooperation, and I want to do my part in the next step of that. Right? So, for me, one of the most inspiring stories around that is around the way King approaches the people with whom he disagrees. Right? And some of the things we forget about King, just like at every step of the way, people blocked him. Like not only the White Citizens Council, which obviously blocked him, and Bull Connor, but Reverend Jackson, not Jesse Jackson, but Reverend J.H. Jackson here in Chicago, part of the Baptist leadership, couldn't stand King. In fact, this is a true story. Closed the door of the church that faced Martin Luther King Boulevard, because he didn't want the address of the church to be on Martin Luther King Boulevard. It opened a new door. So every step, King goes, people are opposing him. Every step. 1956, they finally win the Montgomery bus boycott. But it's a really small victory, right? It's not like they win the Montgomery bus boycott and all of a sudden, then Barack Obama was the next day, right? Like they marched They walk to work for 380 days. There are crosses that are burned on front lawns. There are people that are harassed. There are people that are beaten. People commit suicide because of just the craziness of the situation. King's house gets firebombed. He doesn't know if his baby and his wife Coretta are going to be alive when he gets home. It's an extremely challenging 380 days. So it's over, and they win the right to sit front to back in the buses of Montgomery, Alabama, right? And a journalist points out this juxtaposition that says, look at everything you did, and this is what you won. Aren't you angry? I mean, don't you want revenge? And King's response is, this isn't the time for revenge. This is the time for redemption. This is the time for reconciliation. This is the time to build the beloved community. So that's King at 27, 1956, right? So he's seen some ugliness, but it hasn't gone on for years and years and years. So fast forward 10 years. And now King is here, 1966, Marquette Park, mile and a half southwest of here. He's with 700 peaceful marchers, fair housing. 5,000 people in Marquette Park show up to throw bottles and bricks and stones. King gets hit in the head with a brick, goes down on one knee, feels his head, looks at the blood, gets up and keeps walking. August 1966. There's a story in Taylor Branch's magnificent trilogy of the civil rights movement, America and the King years, right? The story about Chicago in 1966, where King, there are multiple marches. This is one of the things that people often don't realize. Like, Selma is not one march, it's multiple marches, right? Market Park is not one march, it's multiple marches. So King gets hit with the brick and he comes back the next day. And he escapes his security detail. And he goes up to these white kids who are hurling racial slurs and slinging bricks, and he says to them, look at how smart and good looking you are. You don't want to reduce yourself to this hate. That is a religious ethic at play. As you debase yourself in your oppression of me, I will hold up a crown above your head and tell you you can achieve it. That is a religious ethic at play. One of my favorite stories is the story of the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, at Hudaybiyah. And it's a similar religious ethic at play. So this is, my friends Iram and Janan will correct me. Zubair, if you paid attention to his Ismaili religious lessons, might correct me also. But the year 628, right? This is 628. Prophet Muhammad has been involved in 3 largely defensive wars against the tribes of Mecca who were trying to extinguish Islam. And he has a dream that he appears in Mecca, not as a warrior, but a pilgrim. And he wakes up and he commands the Muslims, his companions, the Sahaba, to prepare to go through the pilgrimage to Mecca. Shave your heads. Actually, they do that all later. They shave their heads, etc. later, but they dress in the white cloth. And the only weapons that they bring are the little sword that is meant to cut that is used in the ritual killing of the animals that are involved in the pilgrimage. So they're weapon free except for that. And they move towards Mecca. And the Meccans hear about this, and I think the technical word is they're tripped out by it. It's a joke, seeing if you're paying attention. They don't know what to do, right? Because it is part of their honor to protect pilgrims coming into Mecca. But here's their sworn enemy, right? So the Prophet and his companions, they circle at this little roundabout place called Hudaybiyah. And Abu Sufyan, one of the leaders of these Meccan tribes who oppose the Prophet, rides up and basically says, what's going on? And they say that they are preparing to do the pilgrimage, and it is part of the honor of these tribes, the Quraysh, to welcome pilgrims. And Abu Sufyan says, that's not going to happen. So the Prophet Muhammad negotiates. It comes out of a negotiation with something called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which, I think the technical term is, gives away the store. The Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad says, we will turn around and leave. We're not going to do the pilgrimage. We've come here to do the pilgrimage. I have basically dragged my companions here against their will because they want to be fighting. I've dragged my companions here. I've made them wear the white cloth. But we'll leave. And we promise we won't come back for a year. And oh, by the way, anybody who's converted to Islam and lives in Medina and wants to return to Mecca, we'll let return, and we won't demand reciprocity. And on and on and on. Gives away the story. Ali, Umar, his closest companions, great warriors, they're extremely frustrated by this, right? What is going on? So it comes time to sign this parchment. And Abu Sufyan looks at it and says, I'm not signing. Why aren't you signing? And he points and he says, because the other line, signatory, is supposed to be Prophet Muhammad. And it sticks in my throat even to say it, I don't recognize his prophethood. If I did, we wouldn't be at a war. So I'm not signing anything that says he's the Prophet Muhammad. And this is it for Ali and Umar. Stand up, ready to fight, pull their little daggers that are meant for sacrificing animals. And the Prophet Muhammad says, sit. And he says, strike the term Prophet Muhammad. And they cannot bring themselves to do it. This is a direct command from their governor, from their general, from their prophet. They can't do it. Physically can't do it. So Muhammad, who is illiterate, he cannot read, says, give me the pen, show me where it says Prophet Muhammad, and he strikes himself. And you know what? He wins. 2 years later, they come into Mecca, and hordes of Meccans convert peacefully, no bloodshed. They want to be a part of that mercy. They want to be a part of that generosity. Sometimes you show up as a warrior, and sometimes you show up as a pilgrim. But there is deep spiritual wisdom to King saying, this isn't the time for revenge, this is the time for the beloved community. There is a deep spiritual wisdom to the Prophet Muhammad saying, we'll turn around and go back. We'll wait a year. We'll give you what you think you want now. We are writing a larger story that we think you are going to want to be a part of. I will leave you with this before our conversation. There's a great poem by Edward Markham, which I repeat over and over and over everywhere I go. I'm going to say that, and I'm going to say this final line by Aimé Césaire. You drew a circle that drew me out, heretic rebel, a thing to flout, but love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that drew you in. And there's the line by Aimé Césaire, which is, there is room for all of us at the rendezvous to destiny. And I think what social change artists, interfaith leaders, who are drawing from the wells of this religious wisdom, I think what we know how to do is, when are the stakes more important than the disagreement? And that's not answered principally in the abstract, but principally in the moment. When is the foster kid more important than how you voted? And when do you show up as a pilgrim and